Welcome to Senate Commerce Committee. We are glad to see everyone here today. We will start our meeting with requests for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move on to our presentation, and Matt Willis will be giving us, from KLRD, will be giving us some recommendations from the Special Committee on Workforce Development. And as we've talked about many times, that is just a recurring theme in any industry, every corner of the state that we are examining in commerce this session. So I think this will be very helpful information. So thank you and welcome to committee. Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee. So as she said, I am Matthew Willis, Senior Research Analyst with Legislative Research. And I was also the facilitating staff member for the Special Committee on Workforce Development. So I believe you all should have copies of the committee report in your packets, and I will just kind of skim over some of what occurred in our 2 days worth of meetings and then highlight some of the various recommendations made by the committee before taking questions. So the committee itself was directed to study laws and regulations that may act as barriers of entry into the Kansas workforce. We were authorized to meet for 2 days and met on September 29th and November 21st. Both days were largely filled with hearing from a variety of different conferees about challenges for the workforce in Kansas, about their experiences, hearing about different or innovative programs around utilizing prisoners or individuals who had just gotten released from prison, reintegrating them in the workforce, individuals with special needs, just kind of really capturing a broad overview of things. And I believe all of those conferees are kind of summarized within the report. And then for recommendations, the committee had, I think it was 18 or 19 recommendations. And so I'll try not to read through all of them, but kind of highlight them. So the committee recommended to assist adult learners who are seeking an online education to achieve degrees that are critical to the economic growth of Kansas, examine ways to provide financial assistance to more students, especially or including those who are seeking their degree through online models, ensuring increased amount of scholarship funding is tied to living and working within the state, encouraging the Department of Commerce to do additional statewide marketing for a variety of things, developing and supporting innovative approaches and programs to address workforce shortages that could include things like tax incentives, tuition forgiveness, and other ideas. Continue and increase support for workforce development programs that are effective, advocate for enhanced reentry programs to encourage ex-offenders to reenter the workforce, support growing the Kansas and local economies through applied research and private-public partnerships, support an increased focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, support accountability measures for increased funding for need-based aid, support policies to expand access to affordable child care. There was a decent amount of conversation regarding that topic. Support changes to enable teachers from other states to obtain licensure more quickly. There were several requirements as far as follow-up research, both from the Legislative Research Department, but also requesting the Chamber of Commerce to present and review their workforce study program and investigating, and they recommended a general investigating disability pay caps to understand how they affect workforce, consider amending statute to allow the Department of Education to provide outside access to specific type of information. A recommendation was made to proceed cautiously regarding the legalization of marijuana. And then the final two were considering the creation or expansion of an individual child care tax credit, and for the appropriate House and Senate committees to study and make recommendations regarding the child care shortage. So those were all the recommendations. I would be more than happy to stand for any questions on the two meetings or the recommendations.
Questions from the committee? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you and I had visited with this briefly right before we gavelled in. So the recommendation to provide financial assistance to more students, including those who decide to complete degrees through the online-based model, we're talking post-secondary,
Yes, I believe most of the discussion was around helping take individuals who had no or partial college experience and helping them get to acquiring those certificates or degrees they need to better participate in the workforce.
Okay, thank you very much. Just wanted to clarify.
Other questions from committee members? Yes, Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fourth to the last one, consider amending statutes to allow the Kansas State Department of Education, so on and so forth. What does that mean?
So there was a specific conferee who was discussing that, I guess at one point in time, the Department of Education with the Board of Regents and I think the Department of Labor had compiled a bunch of state information to try and be able to track kind of the outcomes from students in K-12 through higher ed and into the workforce to try and discover trends or things that might have impacts on career outcomes. But the KSDE stated that due to specific statutes, they were unable to share that information with outside sources or outside organizations to analyze it. I'd be more than happy to provide that testimony if you're interested in reading it. But
I just don't, you as you mentioned, and I'm not trying to be contrary here, but you said that to provide the state longitude, a status system, and then we can't get it compiled. Why is it a recommendation, I guess?
The conferee's recommendation was for the legislature to amend the specific state law that KSDE was citing as not allowing them to provide that information to any other entities. And the committee just chose to kind of recommend considering looking at that statute for that purpose.
So we're going to get information and then we can't share it. Is that what you're telling me?
It's information that is already being gathered. From my understanding, again, from testimony, was that the information is stuff that is already gathered by various agencies, and it's just that they are not able to share it outside of their agency for, say, an interest group or even, say, a group of researchers at a university or something to be able to then try and analyze and draw broader understandings from that data.
Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Two things that I am finding really exciting as I look for enhancing workforce development. One is the training of formerly incarcerated folks that we're doing now. My thought is, can we find a way to get that training to them before they're released? Of course, this would be a carefully vetted group of folks and that sort of thing. But then they would be ready to hit the ground running. One of the biggest challenges to reduce recidivism is having a job, and they could hit the ground running with the chance of more than a minimum wage job. The second thing that you touched on a little bit is the situation of folks who are disabled. That it would be lovely if we could find a way to educate folks in general, the society at large, that disabled doesn't mean not capable of anything. It's if a person is blind, there are many things they can be very productive at and that sort of thing. So those were two ideas that a little outside the box perhaps, but pretty valuable and we have to be looking outside the box, I think. Clearly what we've always done isn't quite working for us. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ware. And I'll just add to that you can see that the recommendations basically are the work of, in my mind, this committee and the Commerce Committee on the House side. We can identify the issue. The question is, what do we do about it differently to find those solutions? And last night I heard a statistic that recidivism of an inmate, if they do not have, and what we do know is if they have hope in a career past when they are released, that the recidivism rate is very, very low. And if we can get them on that path while they're still incarcerated, the recidivism rate is very low. However, if they go back, if we have to put them back in jail, that it's over $1 million over the lifetime of that inmate. So this makes sense on what a right thing to do level, helping others stop that trajectory, and economic sense. It's just a win all the way around. So I would echo your thoughts, Senator Ware, and Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, and I absolutely would agree with that. And I thought we had heard that there may be some programs that are inside Lansing. So there is a little bit of that, but not enough. Right, not enough. I was going to go back and just add something to Senator Dahl's question about the longitudinal data study. Just had a conversation this morning. There may be a way that we can get that data to help with workforce development and make those connections by working with the university. So we may not need to change state statute. We're working on that a little bit. It's just good, useful information.
Senator Dahl, follow up.
Just to carry that out, Madam Chair, I noticed that you were on this interim committee. And what was the thoughts when they were doing that particular bullet point? I mean, was what Senator Dietrich said makes it more clear, but I'm still having trouble to grasp the goal of it. If we said we're going to let some of that information out. Is that how I heard you, Senator Dietrich?
We believe the data that was collected in 2019, and that's the last time it was collected on workforce plans and development and those kinds of things, may be able to be utilized through a partnership with the university.
And who has that data?
KSDE has that data.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also had the opportunity to serve on the task force over the interim, and a couple things that are not in the report that really stood out in my mind and just sort of were etched in my memory. We had one conferee that mentioned at that time Kansas had 11,000 jobs available and 6,000 available workers. So they said if every person who was seeking employment found employment, we would still have 5,000 jobs that would go wanting. Now, there would be other individuals that could be, of course, into the workforce that weren't at that time. But I found that as an interesting telltale. And then something to mention to us from the president of the Board of Regents that has caused some controversy when I mentioned it in a listening tour. And I realized that this is statewide. But we make the ACT available to all of our high school upper class students. Only 71% of the students we make this test available to are actually taking the test, which I don't understand that. If it's no cost to the student or parent because taxpayers are paying for it, why there isn't a higher percentage. But the distressing thing to me from the Board of Regents was of those 71% who are taking the ACT, only 20% of high school graduates are college ready. 20% of the 71% are college ready. Now, I realize that in some schools it's going to be higher than in other schools, but that tells me that we've got some opportunities here to improve workforce. I don't have the answers, Madam Chairman, but those two things just really stuck in my craw when we had that many jobs that would go wanting, even if all the workers that were looking for jobs got a good job. But then the fact that only 20% of our high school students who graduate that take the ACT are college ready, that's 1 in 5. That means 80% aren't ready. Just a little bit of comment because I did not see it in the report here, and I realized they couldn't put everything in the report. So there's no criticism of the report, but information that the committee heard that you can find. I'm certain they can provide you the testimony, and you can see those numbers. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Dahl.
Sorry, I'm awful chatty today. Any sociologist would tell you that if you have 5% employment or less 5% of your population's unemployable. No one will hire them. And so, and I can give you examples of that. I mean, people aren't going to hire these people because they're going to have a heart attack any second. They don't take care of themselves. They don't do whatever. And to answer the 71% that take ACT scores, if I was going to go into welding or going into a particular field such as that, or going to go farm, I wouldn't take the ACT test. So there's probably a lot of people that feel that way.
I will follow up on that comment. To me, that kind of emphasizes the point that the 71% are those that see themselves or think the possibility is they are going to college. I mean, that, and they want, yet 20% are only college and career ready in the 4 areas that are measured on the ACT. That's a concern. And I do know there are conversations around, to your point, Senator Dahl, using perhaps ACT work keys as a way to measure career readiness in some of our students. So I know those conversations are going on. How can we measure the college and career readiness of our students? So I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that. Upcoming, any other questions? Senator Stephan and then Senator Dahl.
Thank you. Well, I do think we need to clarify the importance of the inflation rate. The inflation rate is looking at the people who are actually looking for jobs. And we know since the virus response came along, we have a distinct layer of our population that is totally out of the job market but are able-bodied. So I'm not sure that any of these numbers we heard accurately reflect the number of people available to work. And that's job one, is get these people back in the workforce. We do not need a designated group of people who we pay for them to live like royalty.
And I would just say, Senator Stephan, in response, that is why you'll see a lot of the recommendations are about working with private industry and education and government as a partnership to make sure we get the training, the skills necessary, and we all do our part, because this isn't just on the businesses that need to hire. This affects all parties involved here. So, Senator Dahl. That's an excellent point. Any other questions for Matthew on this? And as we know, this discussion is far from over. We'll be coming back to it multiple times, I know. Seeing none, thank you, Matt, for the presentation. One of the recommendations was having the Kansas Chamber present on their challenges that they have found in competing for workforce in the state of Kansas. So we will hear from Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs from the Kansas Chamber. Welcome back to committee, Eric.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Good morning. Happy 2023 and good to be back. You should have a paper copy, PDF copy of our workforce report. I was joking with somebody yesterday, we spent $150,000 on a tax foundation study that was released in January of 2020. And then COVID happened and people forgot all about tax reforms. Kind of the same thing with workforce studies. This study that was conducted, a gentleman by the name of Ted Abernathy has performed some research studies on workforce development across the country on behalf of chambers and business trade associations, analyzing how states are performing in the workforce arena. and has put out some good data that we have heard at our national conferences, national chamber meetings, and asked him to do a study for us in Kansas. And in the fall of 20, this was released. So it was still under COVID, so it's still kind of forgotten about. As workforce issues have needed to be addressed, changes to the unemployment insurance system and modernization needed to be addressed. Workforce was kind of not talked about as much, but we're happy to see the attention that was given in 2022 and through the interim committee process. But now allows us the opportunity to talk about this study that Ted and his group put together. So if you look at the executive summary, and I'll be quick, just knowing that we're a shorter committee here, really outlines 20 recommendations. I presented to the House Commerce Committee last week on this, and really what you can summarize this as is a lot more partnerships between K-12, higher ed, and the business community. A lot more collaboration and the government and legislature. So Department of Commerce, Kansas Works programs, there needs to be some more collaboration. I was just talking with Matt Casey yesterday from the Board of Regents about what their focus is and pursuing and trying to push students into careers that face high demand openings. And I think the conversation that he was sharing from the Board of Regents perspective and their outlook right now on higher education is spot on. I told him, I said, you know, with workforce being an issue, I think it'd probably be a good idea for the Board of Regents and us to do a Zoom call or virtual meeting this summer to talk about workforce and what they're doing and what our members are experiencing. So he and I are going to try to work on planning that over the next few months for post-session. But overall, a lot of really good positives came out of that workforce development interim. A lot of good positives out of this. Some of those items are the same. But when I spoke to the committee, the interim committee, we just quickly said, you know, if we could prioritize out of this list of 20, which ones to pursue, I had circled 1, 6, 10, 11, 13, 15, and 18. And I'll go through those again later so you don't have to wonder what they were. But really, state level goal for student work-based learning is number 1. Number 6, appropriating or raise funds for talent attraction and retention. Specifically, number 7 also, and there's some more in-depth language in the actual report, but tying university scholarship programs such as the nursing and engineering initiatives to post-graduation residency requirements. That was a recommendation that Ted gave. We have those programs that are working well. The engineering initiative was just extended, I believe, in 2021. And if you remember from those hearings and when the bill was passed and the program reauthorized, we are exceeding the expectations and goals that the Board of Regents initially set out for the number of engineering students that are graduating. But we still continue to hear from our engineering firms, we need more employees, we need more graduates. So what can we do to keep those students going through that engineering initiative, going through the great Kansas schools that we have? How do we keep them here? How do we retain that talent and keep them from moving to other states? Number 10, another one that I thought should be a focus of ours and is a focus of ours right now within the chamber, but for the state as well. You know, for a state our size, we're very fortunate to have the 3 military institutions that we have and the level of investment that we do. But how do we increase the attention to and retention of military personnel when they're completing their service to the country? How do we keep them in Kansas? And so Alan, our president and CEO, asked us to launch a Military and Veterans Affairs Council that has, you know, multiple focuses. But the ultimate focus is how do we engage our military institutions to bring those individuals into the Kansas private workforce to come work for our membership and Kansas businesses. That's one goal. The second goal is obviously to continue to support the levels of investment and institutions that we have in Leavenworth, Wichita, and Junction City. Number 11, finalizing language here on this one, it would be to create a state apprenticeship tax credit for businesses. Kudos to Governor Kelly last fall for creating the Office of Apprenticeship. For whatever reason, we rank very low in the number of apprenticeships in the state. I don't know, historically apprenticeships were viewed as, trades or labor entities only, and that's just no longer the case. Registered apprenticeships are a great program for businesses to offer their employees. It provides, obviously, the training component, but it also tied in with the apprenticeships is the guaranteed upward mobility and increase in pay for employees of those apprenticeship programs. So again, we are finalizing the language on that. I just got that back, I think it was Thursday or Friday, from Shonda Atwater, the director of the Office of Apprenticeship, some of the changes that they made to that bill. Really good changes, pleased to see it. So I think we're moving on the right track and just need to get that finalized, make sure everything's good, and get the bill draft started there. But we had modeled the language off of Alabama, so there was some changes that needed to be put in place there. But really what Shonda's goal is to try and double the number of apprenticeships that are offered in the state of Kansas. And I think that's a very, very attainable goal, especially with just because where our current numbers sit. Along those lines, develop alternate sponsoring entities for a registered apprenticeships program using local workforce boards or community and technical colleges, versus just employers, to where, again, I mentioned at the beginning, partnerships between the business community and technical colleges and community colleges, getting everybody to work together and be on the same page is I think, a theme that you'll see throughout this report as you guys read it more in depth. Again, creating more short-term training offerings at Kansas Technical and community colleges for upskilling and retraining of adult workers. That goes back to the recidivism issue that you were talking about, goes back to the transportation issue and Senate Bill 2 that the Senate Transportation Committee heard this morning, of ensuring that individuals who are have a suspended license and have a traffic citation, that they don't lose their license. Let them have a process to appeal for a waiver with the Department of Revenue, so they can have a restricted license, so they can still drive to and from work and not lose their job over minor traffic citations with a suspended license. So those types of policy changes that the legislature can consider that are good for the employees to allow them to be able to maintain economic mobility and upward mobility through their jobs. So moving on, I'll stop with going through the list of recommendations, but on page 7 of the report, this is what's probably the most concerning page in the report. Our workforce struggle is not going to go away. This is the estimated change in working age population up over the next, used to be 10 years, now 7, 8. But look at all the red on that map, and you're seeing that those counties are losing over 10% of the working age population. Both Governor Kelly and her challenger, Derek Schmidt, campaigned on addressing Social Security benefit taxation and how to treat that. As individuals enter retirement but are still able to work, our tax structure should not create a penalty to where they earn $1 over the exemption and then all of a sudden all that income is subject to taxation. I think there is uniform agreement among everybody to find a solution toward that, but that should help with that workforce issue. But we also need to look at just the pure numbers game. We have to bring people into the state. We have to grow the state. We have to grow investment in the state. We have to be competitive in all areas to make that happen. So all policies have to be considered in order to grow and attract investment here in the state. So for a long time, since 2004, we had utilized economic firm out of Florida called Growth Economics, who conducted an annual competitiveness index for us. Every year that report said the same thing that this report says, is that Kansas has a very high education attainment level. Our workforce, our citizenship is very well educated, whether it's career and technical college or higher education. We have a very highly educated workforce and population in the state of Kansas. But ultimately, we need to get more people here. It's a numbers game. I believe there's something in here about immigration. I mean, there has to be comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level. There has to be something done on that front. And I said this to the House committee last week, and I'll say it again today, if I were king for a day, Our immigration system would be based on the skill sets that those individuals have to legally enter the country. It shouldn't take 10 to 12 years to be approved and come into the country, and then the federal government would then divvy up to the states a certain number of visas, and then Kansas can decide what type of workers do we need. Do we need ag workers? Do we need engineers? Do we need healthcare workers? Whatever that is, let the states have some flexibility so then we can bring people in here. It shouldn't be that difficult to accomplish, but obviously we know how Congress works, and it is. So a little statistic here on page 14, 54% of jobs in Kansas require training beyond high school, but not a 4-year degree. Meanwhile, 44% of the Kansas population has this level of skill training. We rank well in our ACT, percent of certification, but one of the recommendations is to get more counties involved with the ACT certification program. Our Kansas Works program is very well funded. It has potential to be good, but there's some quotes in here on page 17, 18, where it goes into how a lot of businesses don't really know the services that are offered. And again, I think that's a partnership in messaging between the Department of Commerce and the state and the business community, where we need to get the message out of what the Kansas Works system offers. The feedback is it's pretty much highly effective for large employers. It's a good program for large employers. The small and medium employers, they haven't found a way to take advantage of the system yet. And so I think, again, that's a partnership between the state and the business community to figure out how to improve the Kansas Works program and make it more responsive to employers. As you see this quote here, one firm with 160 employees said they tried to interact with the system but got lost in the shuffle. So there are ways to improve the systems that we have in place. Going through, there's strengths and weaknesses of that system. Page 22, also after committee, when you guys are reading through this a little bit more, if you have some downtime, the best practices and priorities of other states, that's a really good synopsis of what Wisconsin, Alabama, Rhode Island, I can't remember if I said Arkansas, Colorado, some of the programs that they have in place. Arkansas has done a lot for workforce development, especially on the tech ed side. Arkansas has really seen a lot of significant growth and improvement there. That's a real good state to follow. So the fact that TED gives these recommendations, we had TED do a competitiveness study for the chamber on everything outside of workforce, including tax policy, because the thing about his reports, he tells you where you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And oftentimes authors will leave it at that. And the fact that he gives detailed recommendations and kind of a to-do list, I greatly appreciate that. As somebody who's trying to help improve things, the doctor can tell you what's wrong with you, but if he doesn't tell you how to fix it, then what good is that? So going into page 30 on the recommendations, again, that's just kind of reiterating what I went through at the very beginning. Some of these objectives have been accomplished. Item number 14, creating the Registered Apprenticeship Program Coordinator. We now have that. So again, there have been some changes made to state policy and efforts by the legislature that have been adopted in this report since it was drafted at the end of 2020. There's still some areas to grow. You see the red check mark on the Kansas Promise Scholarship Program, reforming the labor laws to enable youth under 18 to get more work experience. That was Senate Bill 91 that this committee worked hard on over the last couple of years to get approved, extending the school district liability coverage. So a lot of good changes that have taken place out of this report already, but obviously there's still room to grow. So be happy to answer any questions, but wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present on this today and share what Ted put together for us.
Thank you very much. Questions for Eric? We'll go Senator Peck, then Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Stafford, I noticed on page 9 something that really got my attention, the graph there. 2019 employment in Kansas. Looks like number one's government.
It is, by a pretty significant margin.
So we should grow government to accommodate these employees? I'm kidding.
Unless you want an apprenticeship program in that arena, but probably not. Yeah, I mean, that's concerning. I mean, I think a lot of it is driven local level. I mean, state government's been held relatively flat. I think when you compound the local aspect on it, that's probably where you're seeing a lot of those numbers from. You know, we have 105 counties and all the staff associated with having 105 counties. And I think, you know, Alan is really good at, whenever we have staff meeting, he always opens up with Kansas trivia, which I fail miserably, but I learn a lot. But he had mentioned one of our staff meetings. It's something like 80 counties peaked in population in 1897. I mean, it's crazy to think about that. I mean, so how do we, you know, we all know the story of we have 105 counties because the county seat had to be a horseback ride away. I mean, I think we can evolve. I know, Senator, we've talked about this many times about what can we do to help ensure consolidation or push consolidation of local governments where applicable. And, you know, I think it was Chris Steiniger was the one who had a MAP or BRAC program back in like 2007 or 8 or 9 about consolidating down to 60 counties or something like that. So there's been discussion, but there's never been any real big bite at the apple to try to make that happen.
Anticipated some of my questions, so a lot of this is or could be attributed to local, but when government jobs, is that anyone that's paid by tax dollars other than in the education arena, or I'm curious as to how broad this government reach is.
I would guess that education's probably in there because I don't think it, well, there's educational services on the 5th line. Let me get clarification from Ted on what all that includes.
We have frequently heard that Kansas is in the top 5 in the per capita government employees.
I think top 3.
Well, that would be
Hawaii and New York. Yeah. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Ware?
Thank you so much. Remind me who Ted is. I don't know him personally like you do.
No. Well, and I actually asked to have him speak on the House side, and then knew the answer for today too. When we sent an email to see if he'd be available to fly out to Kansas to present this report, because he could go into a lot more detail than I can. We got an out of office reply saying he's out of office till into January. So we took that as a no. But he has done these studies. He works for a firm. I think there's some details on who their firm is on the back of their report. But we got in touch with him because he had done some work. So Economic Leadership is their group that he works for. Page 32. He has done some workforce studies and economic studies for some other state chambers. And when we were at our national meetings, he presented, and then Alan ended up meeting him at just one of the CEO conferences. And so that's how we got his name to do a study on Kansas.
Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate Senator Peck's comment about the growth of government. And going back to those days, I think I sat on some of those presentations, maybe that Alan had did. But help me out here. I think there's like over 12,000 different units of government or whatever in Kansas, right? And so
between townships and everything, yeah.
Right. And so I guess, having the opportunity to, run for governor many years ago and actually go out to, around the rural parts of our state, talk about schools and providing public services, your constituents and stuff. Local control is, people want that. And so I guess my point is that we can sit back here in Topeka and talk about eliminating government, but at the end of the day, when you implement that, it needs to be seen as not a rural versus metropolitan thing. It needs to be seen as basically it makes sense for all. And so I guess I'll throw this back at you, Eric, since you tossed this out. I think if the chamber wants to take some real leadership on this deal, one thing, and we talk about the counties, but I guess what I would ask is that what if the business community had a discussion with the government association and basically talk about townships? Because I think when you look at townships, every county, rural, metropolitan area, they have lots of townships. And just being a small business owner and, having a business that works with the federal government, I mean, you've got procurement processes there. And just from a bureaucracy standpoint, if you have 33 different procurement procedures for buying a snow truck, in these 33 different townships in a county, if you could just basically start consolidating those services to the county level, I think that's something that all counties could at least benefit from, as far as talking about wringing, excessive bureaucratic spending out of the process. And so maybe having some sort of a carrots versus stick type of policy approach. Because I've asked that question in Douglas County. I mean, it's like everybody loves the roads. Man, every township, they have their own clerk and they raise their own, they're taxing for that stuff. So,
and there was a bill, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that the league introduced, and it passed. It became law. We supported it. That was intended to make it easier for those townships and the smaller entities, not the cities and counties, the smaller entities to kind of consolidate within the county, was kind of the goal. And I don't know, I haven't heard anything on if that's been successful, what the result of that legislation was, but I know when Trey and Amanda at the time were working on that, they approached us to see if there's something we were interested in, and yeah, we ended up supporting it. So, but yeah, noted. Happy to have those conversations to see what can we do, at least on that front. And yeah, I mean, I get your point about the rural communities and their sentiment, and yeah, by no means do we need to sit here and say, well, we know what's best for their home, right? But what can be done to consolidate government while still protecting, school districts, in the sense of, we're not going to eliminate the high school, it's centralize the administration, right? So that's kind of been conversations that we've had. But yeah, I would love to see some sort of effort to figure out the best way to do that. And as you said, the carrot, how can you look at businesses that, whether it's economic downturns or try to gain more efficiencies, they offer early retirements. Is there a way we can offer early retirements that would result in us being able to kind of absorb some initial upfront costs, but overall experience some savings in the long run through changes in modernization and how we deliver government as a state?
Some additional questions? Yes, sir. Just a couple more questions. And so I love this chart on the bottom of page 7 about you showing like the by county, who's gaining, who's losing less or more than 10%. I guess maybe a more appropriate chart would be the same county breakout, but basically give you a sense of where our population areas are at. I guess what I want to ask the chamber, because to me,
page 5 for that, it might give you a better idea. Page 5 has a population growth estimation.
So that's your growth.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's nothing about just what's the raw numbers.
Yeah.
So something pictorial that shows where everybody's at. And I guess where I'm going with this question is that it seems to me there's a couple things. I mean, before we start considering additional business tax incentives and stuff like that, I think there's a couple macro trends we've got to recognize with this state. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you should know this more than I do. I've heard this signal like 2030. My understanding is like 53% of your state's population is in Northeast Kansas. And so say 7 years down the road, if that's half the state's population living in Northeast, and then you go your way down I-35, you look at South Central, you got Sedgwick, Harvey, you got Saline up through the I-135 corridor. I mean, can you tell me what portion of the state's residents live in those two areas?
Well, again, citing my boss, who's a Kansas trivia genius, constantly says that five of Kansas counties have 50% of the population. So you look at, and then he said, then you throw in Douglas and Riley counties, and I can't remember. I think he said 8 of them have 65% maybe. I mean, it's very few number have a large portion of the state.
I guess where I'm going with this is that, when our state was founded, you had basically the railroads, which are a huge economic driver. Obviously, it was agriculture, okay? And your comment about we have certain counties that haven't grown since the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. So what I would posit is that when you start putting together these plans, I think these come across potentially as like, oh, this is like these things can work for everybody. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when we look at why residents are leaving, for example, Douglas County, they're probably different why residents are leaving from, say, Meade or Ottawa counties. And so my point is that when we talk about incentive packages, I do think there's appropriate things to say, what can the state do? But I would also counter that those incentive packages, I think, are going to be more effective in bringing people back into certain areas than others. So I guess the second thing I would leave you with is that, for rightly or wrongly, make no mistake, Kansas is an agricultural state. Industrial ag drives it from the standpoint of, obviously, GDP and value, correct? Yeah. You would agree with that?
Yeah. I think, what was it, Senate Ag the other day, they said ag accounts for 14% of the state's GDP.
Exactly.
Directly and then indirectly, that number jumped significantly.
Right. So, I mean, it's by far, would it be considered the biggest industry?
Yeah.
But when you look at the people, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's almost like a mining operation, a mining business model where wealth is created out of the ground, but the wealth really isn't recognized until it gets to commodity markets and out of state or whatever. And you look at the number of people the number of Kansas as a percentage state that are involved with that. Mm-hmm. Okay. What I'm trying to suggest is that on some of our industries and, areas of the state, is it probably more appropriate to go to the federal government and talk about things like food sources as a national security issue or priority, and basically get the feds involved with our industrial ag areas of the state? Because to me, it's more appropriate for them to be figuring out how do we manage, our food needs, our food requirements, than us here at the state level competing with the other ag states to figure it out. I guess I just lay that out there to you. I don't know if you want to wade into that, but to me, that is huge.
Yeah, food security, yes, absolutely on that front. I don't know, and I don't want to speak for the ag industry. I would think, thankfully the president just delayed the lesser prairie chicken. I would think those types of actions would give pause to wanting to give government more control, the federal government more control over our state's ag policies. But I get what you're saying in the sense of,
don't get me wrong, the lesser prairie chicken, hanging around or not, a lot of these counties are going to continue to bleed. Mm-hmm. And I question whether you can actually get meaningful growth back into them when you're trying to provide solutions at the state level. And so that's just a comment. And then if I can make one more comment, and I'll be brief. I know I've been way too chatty, Madam Chair. The thing about your trade, not your trade, I'm sorry, your training credits.
Oh, apprenticeship tax credit?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So just, we have Dwayne Peasley in our backyard in Douglas County. Full, disclosure here, I have a very small manufacturing company. If my concept ever catches fire, I want to go to Dwayne Peasley and get some machinists. I guess as far as the workforce, the development credits, the apprenticeship credits, to me, I see those being much more beneficial and appropriate for small businesses, particularly those that are starting out, for the life of me, I don't know why we would allow big established business and industries to have that. I mean, from my perspective, sitting here at the Capitol, I mean, taxpayers, we have the Promise Act. We have these other things to get, technical trades and skills available. We already have employers that are donating money and time and supplies to these training programs. To me, offering those types of things to established large employees, that's just like giving somebody an economic development incentive where they were going to go do it anyway. So I would just caution you on that. That to me kind of raises my eyebrows because I think it's just more, sure they're going to take it because it's there, but that's not the reason why they went to bat anyway. My feeling is that everybody in this country, and we all know this, I mean, population, we're getting older, we're grayer, we're dying. Who's going to come up and fill up those places?
Yeah.
So I'll stop with that, Madam Chair. Thank you for your note.
And I'd comment on that one, if I may, Madam Chair, that no matter the size of the company, there's the cost associated with continuing to train your workforce, especially in manufacturing. You can't just train them the first 60 days of their job and say, hey, good luck, see you later. So there's always the ongoing cost associated with that, no matter whether they're small or big. I mean, I do understand your point that, larger, more established companies face different challenges than smaller ones do, but smaller ones would qualify for this. So it's not dependent upon size. It's up to 20 apprentices, I think is how it's drafted right now. But yeah, I understand your point, but Panasonic that we just gave a big incentive plan for, which we were supportive of, they're going to have costs associated with training their employees. I don't know if Panasonic has a registered apprenticeship program or not. I don't know enough about the company to say that. But for those manufacturing and trades programs, construction companies, but you look at the bulk of the companies that would be looking to do this apprenticeship, you're probably, I would assume you're probably operating under 100, 200 employees, which in Kansas, 100's good size, but in the eyes of federal government, it's still a small business.
I'm just trying to say at what point, and believe me, to me, the Panasonic's totally different because that is, to me, truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that is new business formation. What I'm talking about, you have existing established businesses. I mean, I guess at what point do we say, how much do we continue to shovel incentives to establish businesses? And almost it's kind of like, here, we're going to pay you to run your business. It's like, why?
Well, and again, that comes back to our tax foundation study that I mentioned at the beginning, that looking at what tax credits and sales tax exemptions are not effective, and let's repeal them, and whatever their costs are, let's use to buy down the rates. And so there are, yeah.
My only point is that taxpayers already paid for the Promise Act and setting up these chains of training, okay? And I think businesses, particularly the established ones, should be appreciative of that, and they should put some of their skin into that game to be sure it addresses their business needs. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there real quick because we do have Senator Stephan that has a question before our time runs out. Senator Stephan?
Thank you. Well, I guess the question I would pose, do you in the Kansas Chamber feel like it's the taxpayers' responsibility to pay for training of businesses' employees?
I mean, I guess it's the taxpayers who would be receiving the credit. I mean, the taxpayers are the ones that are doing the training, the business community. I mean, we're paying taxes. We're training the residents of our state, the employees.
Are you paying 100% of it?
No, I mean, between the employees.
The average taxpayer is subsidizing in these situations. Do you all feel like that's their obligation to pay some percentage of the training costs?
I think there's just naturally subsidization across all levels of state government and taxation. And I think I guess just because you're asking from a perspective that you're anti-tax credit
Oh, I'm asking a specific question.
Right. I mean, it's a policy decision whether tax credits are effective or not.
I'm asking what you all believe. When you all make these recommendations, do you work from the foundation that it is the taxpayer's responsibility to pay for all or part of
Well, I don't think we look at
employee training?
I don't think we look at it from that perspective of breaking it out like, well, here's what I pay, this is what I want my money to go to. It's all thrown into the same pot, and then you all as policymakers decide how we're going to divide up that money. So I don't think, I understand your point. I really do. I don't think we look at the budget that way, that, I paid $14,000 in taxes or $6,000 in taxes, and I want 4 of it to go to roads, and I don't want to subsidize any corporation for anything that they're doing. I mean, that's not how taxes really work.
Okay, I do have just a couple quick questions if we can pivot before we adjourn here. So on page 21, what really kind of that stood out to me was the very last bullet point. It says, the workforce system was not designed to tackle the state's #1 problem, the lack of population and labor force growth. And to me, that just kind of brings it home, because we're not just trying to take Kansans, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, and provide them the training necessary. We literally don't have the bodies. That's what we're hearing. So we're having to compete with other states, which I think all intertwines with the questions and conversation reflected here in this report. Would that be a fair assessment of it?
Entirely. And to Senator Holland's questions, what can we do to grow those counties that haven't grown for 125 years? I mean, that's people are going where the jobs are, and right now the jobs are in more urban areas. So is there a way to attract investment into, but you look at Salina has great infrastructure, and they've had some success in new jobs and investment. So, I don't view Salina as a rural community. It's a small urban community, but the surrounding areas around it are very rural. But so there's been some success in some of those pockets, but you got the I-70 and 135 interstate intersection there. So, but yes, we need people. I mean, there are, I think if I remember the statistic, it was 2.5 openings for every unemployed individual in the state of Kansas. So there are just not the bodies here. So yeah, we do need to grow the state. We do need to attract people here. We have a great state. I love our state. I think the diversity of it's fantastic, and the people are what make it the best. So, but we have to sell our story and get people to move here.
Final question. You mentioned efforts to keep military personnel when they come here, and then maybe, going from their military service to civilian service. Do we have any idea how many people, when they come here, stay and then have a second career?
That's something we want to get.
Do we know?
So, no. So Alan has tasked me to head our Military and Veterans Affairs Council. We're in the process of putting our board together, but I would like to have both private sector and military representation and folks from the administration to kind of tie everybody in. But that's data that we're wanting to know. What percentage of those individuals stay or are interested in staying versus leaving back to their native state or somewhere else for an opportunity. So that is a question we hope to have answered.
Great. Do you have any time frame around that? I know you're trying to get it sooner rather than later,
yeah.
But would love to have an update on any findings of that.
I would say we got to get our board in place. I told Alan, actually, he's in Florida, coming home from Florida today from a conference. We were talking yesterday, and I told him, I was like, man, one of my to-dos, I got to spend time Friday calling our members and getting our board established. So I plan to do that this week. I would say probably realistically up and running this summer to where we start having our first meetings and start trying to gather information. But we got to find out who the right people are at those institutions to talk to, because right now I don't know who they are. But it's the question, because it's such a great population to bring into our workforce that what can we do to keep them here?
Okay, committee, I know that we could go on probably all afternoon, but to respect everyone's time, I thank everyone for the questions and their attention today. I'm sure that Eric will be glad to answer any questions offline. Thank you, Eric. We will stay tuned. Committee, that concludes our business, and we are adjourned.